Hey guys, tonight we drift gently back along the sun-dappled banks of the Nile, into a small, warm workshop where the air smells faintly of damp earth, crushed mulberry leaves, and a sweet, almost imperceptible scent of silk just beginning to awaken. You trudge barefoot across the packed earth floor, careful not to disturb a stray leaf or tiny strand of fiber. Outside, the Nile ripples lazily under the first hints of sunrise, and reeds sway like sentinels along the water's edge. You probably won't survive this, at least, not the early hours without the proper patience and a calming mindset that matches this ancient rhythm of life. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time below. I want to picture each sleepy listener in their own corner of the world, connecting to the soft murmur of the past. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Inside the workshop, muted beams of light filter through high latticed windows, striking the rows of wooden trays stacked neatly against clay walls. Each tray cradles tiny, wriggling silkworms munching gently on chopped mulberry leaves, their pale bodies nearly glowing in the early light. These creatures are the start of a process that turns a fragile cocoon into the luxurious threads of silk coveted by royalty and traders alike. It's easy to forget, standing here, that this quiet place along the Nile has been a hub of craftsmanship for centuries, quietly shaping trade and culture in ways that historians still argue over. Whether Nubia developed large-scale silk production independently or adapted techniques from Egypt and further east remains debated. Either way, you feel the weight of tradition in the air. A worker kneels beside one tray, sprinkling fresh leaves with deliberate care. You pause to observe the trader carefully selecting a few pieces of woven silk, inspecting color, texture, and consistency. Every choice is deliberate, each cloth evaluated against centuries of accumulated standards. Fringe detail. In some cases, the merchant would sprinkle a tiny amount of scented oil on the silk, both to enhance aroma and to signify quality, a practice thought to appeal to nobles and temple officials. You inhale the faint scent, marveling at the subtle attention to sensory detail that pervades this world. Nearby, a master weaver demonstrates a subtle adjustment to a shuttle, correcting a minor misalignment in the warp threads. You notice how the gesture is almost imperceptible, yet it ensures that the resulting weave remains flawless. This quiet precision has been honed over generations, each small correction echoing centuries of cumulative knowledge. The sound of silk being shifted, the faint rustle of leaves, the gentle clatter of wooden tools, all blend into a soft, hypnotic backdrop. The apprentices take turns attending to the trader's requests, carefully measuring lengths, examining weave patterns, and adjusting trays to accommodate the increased activity. You mimic their motions, feeling your own coordination and awareness sharpen as you work alongside them. Historians still debate the extent to which these trade practices influenced neighboring cultures, but from where you kneel, the workshop is a nexus of both craft and quiet diplomacy, a place where patience and careful negotiation intertwine. You glance toward the wall where early spools of silk are stacked in neat rows, catching the sunlight. Each spool represents hours of careful labor, a quiet testimony to skill and endurance. Fringe tidbit. Some spools were marked with subtle symbols to indicate batch, quality, or even the identity of the weaver, almost like a signature whispered into the fabric itself. Outside, the Nile glows under the fading sunlight, its steady current reflected in the tranquil motions within. You imagine these threads eventually leaving the workshop, woven into garments or traded far along the river, each one carrying a story of meticulous labor and cultural continuity. Historians still debate how widely Nubian silk reached foreign markets, but the care evident here ensures that every strand holds intrinsic value and significance. The air carries a faint sweetness from mulberry leaves and the soft warmth of the workshop floor. You kneel near a tray of nearly cocooned worms, observing their tiny bodies curl delicately as silk threads spiral around them. Every minor adjustment, rotating a tray, repositioning a leaf, brushing lightly over a thread, contributes to the smooth formation of the silk. Fringe tidbit. Some artisans claim that gently humming or speaking quietly to the worms encourage them to spin more evenly, though modern scholars consider this more a ritual of attention than a scientifically proven technique. You notice the apprentices working with a quiet, deliberate focus, each gesture purposeful yet unhurried. The master weaver glides between trays, her eyes trained on minute details, correcting small misalignments with subtle precision. The soft, consistent hum of human activity, mixed with the faint rustle of worms and leaves, creates an atmosphere that feels meditative, almost like a lullaby for both humans and insects. The freshly spun cocoons shimmer faintly, catching the warm glow of evening light. You sense the artistry in every thread, the dedication of every hand, and the patient rhythm that has continued in these workshops for generations. Each cocoon is a miniature testament to careful observation, skill, and devotion, transformed from ordinary leaves and tiny creatures into a product of delicate beauty. As shadows lengthen further, you feel the pace of the workshop slowing. You mimic her motion, adjusting your stance so you don't disrupt the worms. There is a rhythm here, gentle, repetitive, almost hypnotic, that governs the pace of every movement in the workshop. This is not hurried labor. It is meditation in motion. A fringe tidbit floats into your mind. In some Nubian practices, artisans believed softly humming to silkworms encouraged healthier silk. You hum quietly yourself, careful not to jolt them with modern impatience. The floor under your feet is cool and worn smooth by decades of careful steps. Looms rest in shadow, their wooden frames waiting patiently, like silent animals. A man moves down a row of trays, checking the humidity and the distribution of leaves. He nods once at your careful mimicry, a subtle acknowledgement. You have passed your first test of respect for the craft. Light shifts as the sun edges higher, gilding dust motes floating lazily in the air. Threads hanging from beams glimmer faintly, catching the golden glow. You notice tiny imperfections in the trays, little twists or overlaps of leaves, and for a moment, you marvel at the humanity inherent in every small detail. Mistakes, you realize, are part of history, tiny errors stitched invisibly into a grand tapestry. Nearby, another worker lifts a shallow bowl of water, demonstrating how humidity must be carefully controlled to keep the silkworms comfortable. Too dry and the fibers weaken. Too wet and mold creeps in. It is delicate, precise, almost zen-like work, yet entirely grounded in survival. You take a moment to observe the light, the movement, the breathing of the room. The silkworms, the workers, even the humble tools, spindles, simple wooden combs, are part of a system refined over generations. Mainstream historical fact: Nubia, often overshadowed by Egypt, contributed significantly to textile innovation, balancing environmental demands with artistry. You trace one with your finger, feeling the smooth texture, imagining the hands that shaped it, the worms that contributed to it, and the journey that awaits it beyond the workshop. The trader bows once more, leaving the workshop as quietly as he arrived, and the calm rhythm resumes. You notice subtle shifts. The apprentices move with renewed focus, adjusting trays and rechecking leaves. You too are drawn into the flow, lifting, arranging, observing, and inhaling the delicate scents of silk and leaf. The act is meditative, almost trance-like, a gentle lull reinforced by repetition and quiet concentration. Beyond the workshop, the Nile glows like molten metal under the noon sun. Its gentle current is mirrored in the soft, unhurried motions within the walls of the silk workshop. The interaction of trade, craft, and environment is seamless, each element supporting the other. You feel the interconnectedness of it all. The river, the workshop, the silkworms, the humans, and even the distant lands that may one day receive these delicate threads. As mid-morning drifts toward noon, you sense the subtle mastery in every gesture, every breath, every flick of a wrist. Patience, rhythm, and precision rule here, and you, too, are learning their quiet language. In this space, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, feeding worms, shifting leaves, exchanging threads with a merchant. All acts woven together into a silent tapestry that bridges centuries, connecting you to artisans, traders, and silkworms long gone but never forgotten. As the sun rises toward its zenith, the workshop feels warmer, Yet the gentle draft through the open windows keeps the air pleasant and lightly scented with mulberry leaves. You trudge carefully along the narrow paths between trays, noticing the subtle changes in color and texture as the sunlight shifts across the room. Movements become more measured, pauses longer, but the underlying rhythm remains unbroken. The interconnectedness of the workers, the worms, the leaves, and even the distant Nile creates a serene ecosystem of labor and observation, where each small act has a purpose and contributes to a quiet legacy of craftsmanship. You take a deep breath, attuned to the soft glow, the gentle movements, and the pervasive sense of calm. Every gesture, every thread, every tray is part of a larger story, one of patience, care, and the meditative beauty of routine, ensuring that both the process and the product are imbued with intention and reverence. Evening descends gently over the workshop, casting a soft, amber glow across the packed earth floor. You move slowly along the narrow aisles, the rhythmic rustle of leaves and faint murmur of silkworms filling the air like a delicate, living lullaby. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian silk workshops often operated with precise attention to light cycles, coordinating activities from feeding to weaving with natural shifts in daylight, ensuring consistency in cocoon formation and silk quality. A young apprentice kneels nearby, inspecting leaves and gently adjusting the positioning of a few active worms. Fringe tidbit: some artisans believed that wrapping the trays in lightly scented cloth during the last hours of daylight encouraged the worms to spin denser, shinier silk, though historians still debate the practical effectiveness of this technique versus its symbolic role in ritualized care. You observe, tracing the soft contours of a tray, feeling an odd serenity in these meticulous gestures. The workshop pulses with quiet energy. Wooden spindles and rudimentary tools lie within reach, polished from years of use, carrying the tactile memory of countless hands. You feel connected to that continuum, tracing the invisible thread of human patience and ingenuity that stretches backward centuries, even as your own slow breaths sink to the rhythms around you. A small thrill passes through you as a single silkworm lifts its head, almost acknowledging your presence. The realization settles. The future royal garments, ceremonial cloths, and traded luxuries of the ancient world are quietly beginning here, in this gentle, unhurried workshop. And with that thought, you sink a little deeper into the cadence of dawn, letting the soft murmur of spinning, feeding, and breathing guide you into the next stage of the day. The morning deepens as you step fully into the rhythm of the workshop, your fingers brushing against bundles of freshly gathered mulberry leaves. Outside, the Nile glimmers, the current lazy and hypnotic, reflecting a sky streaked with gold and rose. You trudge between rows of low wooden trays, feeling the cool, packed earth beneath your feet, and notice how the workers have already sorted leaves into different sizes. Some chopped finely, some left in larger pieces for slower feeders. This is no casual arrangement. Each leaf is chosen for a purpose, for a stage in the silkworm's diet, and the balance of nutrients ensures the strongest, most lustrous silk threads. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian artisans carefully monitored the diet of silkworms, often importing or cultivating specific types of mulberry leaves to maximize fiber quality. You crouch beside a tray, watching a tiny worm curl over a fresh leaf. Its movements are slow and deliberate, almost musical. A fringe tidbit drifts into your thoughts. In some ancient workshops, workers would whisper to the worms or hum simple melodies, believing that a calm environment improved silk production. It is not known whether this truly affected fiber quality, but it certainly added a rhythm to the early hours, making the act of feeding meditative. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Nubian silk workshops often relied on the natural sunlight not just for warmth, but also as a way to gauge the growth stages of the silkworms, with the intensity and angle of light informing feeding and tray placement. A young apprentice shows you a new batch of leaves, carefully separating them by size and ripeness. Fringe tidbit: in some workshops, leaves were even inspected for tiny insects or imperfections, as the smallest anomaly could compromise an entire cocoon. You lean in, feeling the delicate fuzz of a leaf against your fingertips, marveling at how something so small can affect a whole cycle of silk production. You notice that the silkworms are moving more energetically in the bright sunlight, inching over the leaves with deliberate munching. Historians still argue whether sunlight directly influenced silkworm activity or if it was more the environmental routine surrounding daylight hours that structured their behavior. But either way, the light brings a visible liveliness to the room. A master weaver approaches, demonstrating how to gently manipulate a silk thread as it begins forming. Her hands move with a confidence born of decades, correcting tiny deviations in the emerging fiber. Fringe detail. Some artisans believe that whispering softly to the threads themselves, encouraging them to spin straight and strong, improve the overall quality, a ritualistic practice blending superstition with skill. You imitate her gestures, feeling a sense of reverence for the process, even as your hands are slightly clumsy in comparison. You pause by a tray where the smallest worms are beginning their cocooning stage. The shells glisten faintly, delicate and almost translucent. You notice the care with which the apprentice arranges the surrounding leaves, ensuring that no cocoon is cramped or crowded. The precision seems almost meditative, a slow choreography between human and insect. Historians still argue whether these tools evolved purely for efficiency or also carried symbolic meanings tied to lineage and mastery, but their presence is undeniably central to the craft. A master weaver glides between trays, her movements almost imperceptible yet deliberate, correcting slight deviations in cocoon formation and guiding silk threads with near-magical precision. Fringe detail. Some artisans even used faint sounds, like tapping or soft humming, timed to the worm's natural rhythm to encourage smoother spinning, a practice debated by modern scholars as either genuinely effective or purely ritualistic. You find your own movements gradually synchronizing with hers, each gesture careful, deliberate, and meditative. Outside, the Nile shimmers in the fading light, its steady flow a distant, calming presence mirrored in the careful, measured activity of the workshop. You imagine these silk threads, spun with patience and care, traveling along river and trade routes, carrying both material and cultural significance far beyond the walls of this quiet room. Historians still debate the reach of Nubian silk in regional and transcontinental markets. Yet every thread here speaks of meticulous labor and enduring tradition. The warm, earthy scent of mulberry leaves mixes with the faint, almost imperceptible aroma of the silk itself. You kneel beside a tray of nearly complete cocoons, observing each tiny worm carefully spinning its thread in gentle, spiraling motion. Fringe tidbit. Artisans sometimes whispered short phrases or soft songs to the worms, believing it helped them remain calm and spin more uniformly, though the efficacy of this practice remains a point of scholarly discussion. Apprentices move with a quiet, disciplined focus, adjusting leaves and monitoring threads, while the master weaver's eyes remain attuned to the smallest detail. You try humming quietly yourself, the sound blending with the gentle splash of water and distant bird calls. The workers move silently yet purposefully, their hands flicking leaves into trays with a precision honed over years. A young apprentice balances a basket of chopped mulberry leaves on her hip, shifting weight carefully to avoid spilling. Historians still argue whether these apprentices were children, teenagers, or adults beginning training later in life, but one thing is clear. The knowledge was carefully passed down, guarded like a secret code, and losing a single leaf out of place could disturb the workflow. You lift a handful of leaves, noticing how their surfaces glisten faintly with morning dew. The texture is smooth but fragile, a reminder that even simple elements in this workshop are treated with reverence. Your fingers linger, and you marvel at the thought that these leaves will nourish worms whose work will eventually become delicate threads, perhaps to be worn by a royal in a faraway palace or used in ceremonial rituals. It feels like holding time itself in your hands. A man adjusts the humidity by fanning the air gently across the trays, demonstrating an ancient understanding of environmental control. Too dry, and the fibers become brittle. Too wet, and mold can destroy the batch. You imitate him, learning the subtleties of movement. Slow, steady, precise. Each action is deliberate, a quiet dance with nature. You notice small ritualistic behaviors, tapping the tray before moving it, a soft word, a glance at the river. Practices that might seem unnecessary to an outsider, but clearly maintain harmony in the workspace. Sunlight pours in more boldly now, falling on coils of thread stacked at the far wall. You follow the workshop's flow, feed, check, adjust. Feed, check, adjust. Even your breathing slows, syncing with the pace around you. Outside, the Nile shimmers under the high sun, its surface broken by occasional ripples from passing canoes. You imagine that each silk thread spun in this quiet workshop will eventually travel far, perhaps along the Nile itself, mingling with distant cultures and markets. Historians still debate whether Nubian silk had significant trade impact beyond Egypt, yet you sense that even a single thread carries echoes of labor, care, and cultural identity across distances. The workshop hums with subtle energy. You notice how each worker moves with purpose but never haste, adjusting leaves, monitoring worms, and checking the airflow across trays. You lift a tray carefully, observing the tiny motions of worms below. Fringe tidbit. In some instances, workers would lightly sprinkle water or brush leaves with dew to simulate natural morning conditions, a nuanced practice that scholars still speculate may have been more symbolic than strictly practical. A gentle breeze stirs the hanging tapestries and wooden shutters, and you notice how light and shadow play across the floor, mingling with the warm, earthy tones of mud brick walls. You feel your body aligning with the workshop's rhythm, slow, deliberate, and quietly immersive. Every lift, shift, and adjustment becomes part of a meditative pattern that relaxes your mind almost as effectively as it trains your hands. You crouch beside a tray of nearly spun cocoons, marveling at their delicate perfection. Each one, though small, represents hours of feeding, adjustment, and patient observation. You realize the artistry is not just in the weaving of silk threads but in the entire ecosystem, the leaves, the worms, the trays, and the human care guiding it all. As noon approaches, a lull settles over the workshop. The movements slow slightly, not from fatigue but from the established rhythm of life and light. You take a deep breath, absorbing the scents, the sounds, and the meditative pace. The soft clatter of wooden tools, the gentle rustling of leaves, and the subtle shifting of trays create a calming, hypnotic rhythm that invites you to immerse yourself fully in the meditative process. A tray of freshly spun cocoons catches the last rays of sunlight, their surfaces gleaming faintly with a delicate translucence. You marvel at the tiny perfection of each cocoon, reflecting on the hours of observation, care, and meticulous attention that produced them. Every thread, leaf, and gesture contributes to a centuries-old rhythm of craft and quiet devotion. As the day draws to a close, the workshop slows almost imperceptibly. Hands move more gently, pauses are longer, but the subtle pulse of the room persists. A slow, deliberate heartbeat connecting worms, artisans, and the surrounding environment. You feel an increasing sense of calm, each motion, each soft sound weaving together into a meditative cadence that relaxes both body and mind. You exhale slowly, taking in the soft glow, the measured movements, and the tranquil energy that permeates the space. The delicate, patient process of silk production here is a quiet testament to human care, observation, and skill, offering a gentle rhythm that lulls the senses and anchors you in the enduring beauty of deliberate, attentive labor. The final light of day filters through the shutters, bathing the workshop in a soft, golden haze. You move slowly, almost reverently, along the narrow aisles between the trays, noticing the tiny silkworms curling around leaves and spinning their delicate cocoons. Mainstream historical fact: in Nubian silk workshops, late afternoon and early evening were considered critical for final adjustments, as workers ensured the worms were comfortable and environmental conditions remained stable for optimal silk formation. A young apprentice kneels beside a tray, carefully removing a stray leaf and repositioning a few spinning worms. Patterns emerge, not just in the trays or in the worm's movement, but in the human rhythm that has repeated here for centuries. A young woman shows you how to select the strongest leaves, pointing out veins and texture. "These will give the finest silk," she whispers, as if sharing a secret. You study her hands, noting the ease with which she pinches, lifts, and scatters without disturbing the worms. Every motion is economical, gentle, and precise, honed through repetition over years. You glance at the river again. Canoes drift lazily, their occupants likely unaware of the meticulous life unfolding along the banks. And yet, each strand of silk produced here will ripple outward, touching distant lands, weaving itself into the broader tapestry of trade and culture. It is a quiet power, invisible yet enduring. As morning settles fully, you feel a soft connection to the past. The workers, the silkworms, the leaves, they are all part of a system refined by generations. Historians still argue whether Nubian silk practices influenced Egyptian techniques or evolved independently. But standing here, in the warm light and hum of gentle motion, you understand that it is both innovation and tradition. A slight breeze stirs the workshop, carrying with it the faint scent of wet earth and leaves. You inhale slowly, letting the sound, smell, and rhythm sink into your mind. The day has just begun, but you are already learning to move within this delicate ecosystem, part of a long, quiet chain that connects labor, art, and nature in perfect, sleepy harmony. By mid-morning, the workshop has settled into a comforting, almost hypnotic rhythm. You trudge along the narrow paths between rows of low wooden trays, feeling the gentle warmth of the sun filtering through the mud-brick walls. Outside, the Nile shimmers lazily, the occasional splash of a fish breaking the water's surface adding a subtle percussion to the ambient hum of the workshop. The workshop is a living organism of quiet labor, and for a moment, you feel fully immersed, aware that every small gesture contributes to a delicate, centuries-old tradition of craftsmanship, patience, and gentle mastery. The midday sun now casts a warm, golden glow across the workshop, and you feel the heat lightly pressing against your skin as you move between the low wooden trays. Each tray is meticulously arranged, silkworms nibbling along leaves that have been carefully selected and aligned to encourage optimal growth. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian silk workshops often timed feeding and leaf placement to the sun's position, using natural light cues to maintain consistency and quality in the silk production process. You notice an older artisan adjusting a few trays, lifting leaves and shifting worms with deliberate precision. Fringe tidbit: some workshops practiced what was called whispered weaving, where artisans softly spoke to the silkworms or hummed a tune, believing it would guide the worm's spinning behavior, though modern scholars still debate whether this was psychological, symbolic, or genuinely effective. You hum along quietly, feeling oddly connected to both the worms and the centuries of tradition that precede you. The soft rustle of leaves, the occasional shuffle of feet, and the faint clatter of wooden tools form a rhythm that's almost hypnotic. You follow it instinctively, adjusting leaves on a tray, checking for overcrowded worms, and noting the subtle sheen of silk beginning to emerge. Historians still argue whether Nubian silk techniques were influenced by Egyptian methods or developed largely independently, but the innovation and care evident here make it clear that these artisans had mastered a unique and delicate craft. A young apprentice kneels nearby, demonstrating how to handle a developing cocoon without disturbing the delicate structure. Fringe tidbit: some workshops had rituals for waking the silkworms after midday rest, including gentle tapping or soft humming, intended to synchronize the worm's activity. Though scholars still debate whether these rituals had any measurable impact or were symbolic gestures of care, you quietly mimic the humming, feeling a surprising sense of calm and connection to the small creatures beneath your hands. The room is filled with a gentle rhythm, the soft shuffle of feet, the faint rustle of leaves, and the occasional click of a spindle. Historians still argue whether Nubian silk techniques were influenced more by Egyptian or wider African methods, but the meticulous attention to light, leaf selection, and worm care demonstrates a uniquely refined craft. A master weaver glides silently from tray to tray, inspecting threads and making tiny adjustments with her skilled hands. Fringe detail: some artisans use thin reeds or brushes to guide silk threads, a method that required extreme patience and fine motor control. Its subtlety makes it almost imperceptible to the casual observer. You follow her movements, practicing slow, deliberate gestures and feeling an unexpected meditative rhythm in the process. Outside, the Nile reflects the soft hues of sunset, a gentle companion to the methodical pace of the workshop. You imagine these fine threads eventually forming garments or being traded along the river, each carrying a story of labor, observation, and cultural continuity. Historians still debate how far Nubian silk reached international markets, but even within the workshop, each thread embodies centuries of skill and devotion. The faint scent of mulberry leaves mixes with the warmth of the earth floor. You kneel near a tray where the silkworms are finishing their spinning, observing their tiny bodies curling precisely as threads accumulate in delicate spirals. You watch the workers moving with precise, almost ceremonial motions, each handling leaves and trays as if performing a silent dance that has repeated for generations. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian workshops often integrated local environmental cues into their silk preparation, adjusting light, airflow, and temperature to optimize silkworm health. A young apprentice approaches, balancing a shallow basket brimming with freshly chopped mulberry leaves. She kneels and begins distributing the leaves with careful, rhythmic flicks of her wrist. A fringe tidbit: in some Nubian practices, apprentices would whistle a specific tune believed to encourage the silkworms to spin more efficiently, though scholars still debate whether the sound truly influenced the worms or simply helped maintain a steady human rhythm. You find yourself mimicking the motion and the subtle whistle, letting your actions sync with the natural cadence of the workshop. The scent of earth and silk mingles in the warm air, a faint sweetness that is difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. You kneel beside a tray, observing how the silkworms inch along the leaf edges, nibbling methodically. Their tiny bodies seem almost meditative, moving with a deliberate pace that mirrors the calm patience of the human workers. Historians still argue whether this careful attention to silkworm diet and behavior had measurable effects on thread quality, or if the benefits were mostly symbolic, a reflection of cultural reverence for the craft. You notice the varied textures of the leaves, the veins, the delicate softness of younger shoots, the slightly tougher older leaves. Each type serves a different purpose in nourishing the worms and ensuring the strongest silk fibers. The apprentice points out subtle differences in the leaves, showing you how to select the right type for specific stages of the silkworm's growth. You lean closer, observing the silkworm's tiny movements and the subtle way it wraps silk around itself. Fringe detail: in some instances, artisans would lightly dust the cocoons with powdered leaves or herbs, a practice thought to prevent mold or strengthen fibers, though its actual efficacy remains debated. The attention to such minute detail fascinates you, and you find yourself marveling at the balance between care, observation, and artistry. You step back and observe the entire room, noticing the quiet choreography of labor. Workers adjust trays, rearrange leaves, check humidity, and monitor the silkworms, all in soft, unhurried movements. Even the pauses feel purposeful, as if the workshop itself breathes along with the pace of its inhabitants. The hum of activity is calming, a steady heartbeat that draws you deeper into the meditative rhythm of the day. Outside, the Nile shimmers under the high sun, a gentle reminder that life and work continue beyond the walls of the workshop. You imagine the threads spun here eventually becoming garments, tapestries, or trade goods, carrying with them not just value, but stories, care, and culture. Historians still debate the extent of Nubian silk trade networks, but the meticulous practices you witness hint at the significance of this craft both locally and regionally. You crouch near a tray where several worms are nearing the cocooning stage. Their tiny bodies curl and uncurl, spinning silk in intricate, delicate coils. The apprentice demonstrates how to rotate the tray just so, ensuring the worms have room to complete their work. Fringe tidbit: some artisans even used small wooden sticks to gently guide the threads, a practice thought to reduce tangling, though it required extraordinary patience and dexterity. You mimic the movement carefully, appreciating the subtlety and skill involved. The sense of the workshop, earthy mud, fresh mulberry leaves, and faint silk, blend with the quiet warmth of the day. Fringe tidbit: artisans sometimes whispered short chants or melodies to the worms, believing it would calm them or encourage even spinning, though modern scholars consider this practice more ritual than science. The apprentices move with quiet focus, adjusting leaves, checking threads, and ensuring each worm has the space it needs. The master weaver's eyes follow every small action, correcting deviations with subtle, fluid motions. The soft hum of activity, the gentle rustling, and the warm, fading sunlight create a serene atmosphere, a lullaby of craft and patience. You glance at a tray of fully spun cocoons, their surfaces gleaming faintly in the last rays of light. You marvel at the intricate perfection of each tiny shell, realizing that every hour of feeding, monitoring, and adjusting has culminated in this delicate, almost ethereal result. As the day comes to a close, the workshop slows. Hands move more gently, pauses are longer, but the underlying rhythm persists. You inhale the faint scents, listen to the soft sounds, and feel the calm pulse of the room. An ecosystem of labor, observation, and quiet artistry that bridges generations. You exhale slowly, letting the meditative cadence of the workshop wash over you. Each thread, tray, and gesture is a testament to centuries of patience and care, a gentle rhythm that lulls the senses and anchors you in the enduring beauty of quiet, deliberate craftsmanship. Night approaches, and the workshop is bathed in a muted, amber glow from oil lamps flickering gently along the walls. You trudge slowly between trays, feeling the warm light touch your skin as silkworms continue their delicate spinning, oblivious to the passing day. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian silk workshops often extended activity into early evening to make final inspections, ensuring that environmental conditions like humidity and temperature were optimal for the completion of cocoons. You feel a mix of fascination and humility, aware that even in this slow, sleepy craft, knowledge and skill are paramount. Nearby, an older worker checks trays for moisture and rearranges them slightly to maintain even humidity. You notice the faint sheen on the silkworms' pale bodies, the way they catch the morning light like tiny living pearls. The room feels almost sacred in its quiet devotion, a sanctuary of labor, patience, and repetition. A scholar might argue whether Nubian silk production influenced broader trade networks along the Nile or remained a mostly local craft. Yet standing here, it is impossible to ignore the workshop's quiet significance. You move carefully toward another tray, your fingers tracing the edges of the leaves. The process is meditative. Lift, place, adjust, repeat. It's soothing, almost hypnotic, and you can feel your own breathing slowing, syncing with the subtle rhythm of nibbling worms, moving hands, and gentle fanning. A fringe detail enters your mind. Some workers would add tiny, symbolic markings on trays or leaves, a quiet signature of care and craftsmanship, almost like a whisper to the future. As the morning progresses, you begin to notice patterns in the way workers interact. There is a silent hierarchy. Some adjust humidity, others distribute leaves, and a few monitor the silkworms for early signs of distress. The system is fluid yet orderly, each role essential. You pause to imagine the countless mornings this routine has repeated, decades of quiet dedication, ensuring that Nubian silk remains a product of subtle mastery and patience. You glance out the open doorway. The sunlight on the river has brightened, casting long shadows across the floor. A light breeze carries with it the mingling sense of water, earth, and silkworms, grounding you fully in this moment. Every small motion, the flick of a wrist, the rearrangement of a leaf, the soft hum of a whispered tune, adds to a gentle, collective choreography. Every small gesture, from leaf placement to worm adjustment, feels amplified in importance, and you are acutely aware of how patience and observation are rewarded with delicate, perfect silk. The room's gentle hum and the meticulous rhythm of hands and worms seem to lull your mind into a state of relaxation, a perfect, sleep-inducing focus on small, purposeful tasks. As the sun reaches its zenith, a moment of stillness settles over the workshop. Workers pause briefly, exchanging quiet nods, checking trays, and ensuring the environment remains optimal. You sit quietly, absorbing the harmony of motion, light, and sound. Each element, the hands, the leaves, the silkworms, the air, and the sun, feels connected, forming a slow, deliberate ecosystem of craft, patience, and quiet meditation. By now, your own breathing has slowed, matching the rhythm of the workshop. Every lift, shift, and adjustment becomes a gentle, soothing motion. The artistry is not in grand gestures but in the quiet, repetitive devotion that transforms ordinary leaves and worms into a product of beauty and utility, a process that has persisted quietly for generations, bridging time through patience, observation, and care. The afternoon settles over the workshop with a softened glow, the sunlight now filtering through the shutters at a low angle, casting long, warm streaks across the packed earth floor. You move slowly, observing the silkworms inching over the leaves with their methodical munching, each tiny motion precise and deliberate. Mainstream historical fact: the timing of feeding and environmental adjustments in Nubian silk workshops was often coordinated with the sun's position, creating a rhythm that guided both humans and silkworms through the day. A young apprentice kneels beside you, adjusting leaves and removing any stray debris. A young apprentice kneels nearby, carefully rotating a tray so the silkworms have even space for spinning. Fringe tidbit: some artisans would whisper stories of river journeys or legendary figures to the worms, believing it would create a more harmonious cocoon structure, though historians still debate whether these rituals had any real effect or were symbolic gestures of mindfulness. You find yourself murmuring a short tale, noticing how calming it is to slow your own breath to match the soft, repetitive motions around you. The workshop hums with quiet energy. Wooden spindles and small, well-worn tools rest within easy reach, their polished surfaces a testament to decades of careful use. Historians still argue whether the design of these tools was purely functional or carried symbolic meanings connected to lineage and status, but they undeniably contribute to the precision of the craft. The master weaver moves gracefully between trays, adjusting leaves and silk threads with subtle, almost imperceptible motions. Fringe detail: in some workshops, artisans would lightly tap or brush the silk threads to guide them into perfect spirals, a delicate practice requiring patience, steadiness, and keen observation. You follow along, your hands moving slowly and deliberately, absorbing the meditative rhythm of the process. Outside, the Nile glimmers under the soft light of a rising moon, a silent companion to the steady, measured activity within. You imagine these threads eventually woven into garments, tapestries, or trade goods, each strand carrying the centuries-old knowledge and care embedded in its creation. Historians still debate the precise routes Nubian silk traveled, but the dedication here suggests its cultural and economic importance. The warm, earthy scent of mulberry leaves blends with the faint aroma of silk and the soft glow of the lamps. It is as if time itself has slowed, allowing you to appreciate the extraordinary patience required to create something as delicate as silk from such tiny, wriggling beginnings. Finally, you step back, hands resting on your knees, watching the apprentice adjust the last tray. The sheer care, the deliberate pacing, the near-sacred attention to detail. It is an unhurried world, a world where value is measured not in speed or noise but in quiet skill, patience, and respect for the smallest of creatures. For a moment, you feel completely at home here, swept into a rhythm older than most civilizations, yet intimately human. The first tendrils of mid-morning heat begin to drift through the open windows, and you feel the warm sun brushing against your skin as you kneel beside a tray of silkworms. Their tiny bodies curl and uncurl in gentle, hypnotic motions, nibbling at the mulberry leaves you've just scattered. You notice the subtle variations in their color and size, some almost translucent, others slightly creamier, and realize that each worm is unique, carrying its own rhythm and pace. Mainstream historical fact: the selection and care of silkworms was crucial in ancient Nubian silk workshops, with artisans monitoring every stage to ensure the highest quality threads. Your hands hover over a delicate cocoon as a young apprentice leans in to demonstrate the initial spinning process. Fringe tidbit: in some workshops, spinning was accompanied by soft humming or whispered encouragement, a practice believed to calm the silkworms and promote longer, more consistent threads. You hum quietly yourself, almost embarrassed by how soothing the act becomes, and notice the worms respond in subtle ways, inching forward just slightly faster as if acknowledging your presence. The workshop feels alive with quiet motion. A seasoned worker moves along the rows, checking humidity by touching the leaves and feeling the temperature of the packed earth floor. Fringe tidbit: in some workshops, Apprentices were encouraged to name silkworms, believing that giving each worm an identity would encourage better spinning or simply cultivate a sense of care. You catch yourself whispering a name to one of the worms, feeling a surprising tenderness as it continues its slow, intricate spinning. The workshop hums with quiet energy. Wooden spindles, smooth from decades of use, rest nearby, and you pick one up, noticing the worn grooves and subtle decorative carvings that mark it as a cherished tool. Historians still debate whether these carvings were purely ornamental, functional, or symbolic of a particular artisan's lineage, but they clearly carry stories of generations of care and craftsmanship. A master weaver approaches a tray of developing cocoons, her movements fluid and deliberate. She gently lifts a leaf to check the worms beneath, her fingers deftly avoiding tangling any silk threads. Fringe detail. Some workshops employed tiny brushes to carefully guide silk threads as they formed, a delicate practice requiring patience, precision, and a calm hand. You watch and mimic the movement, feeling both clumsy and strangely meditative as your hands follow her guidance. Outside, the Nile glints under the descending sun, its steady flow mirrored in the workshop's quiet rhythms. You imagine these threads eventually leaving this place, woven into garments or traded across regions, each one carrying the history of careful observation and quiet labor. Historians still argue about the extent of Nubian silk's distribution, but even here, you sense its importance as both craft and cultural expression. The air smells faintly sweet with the scent of mulberry leaves, mingled with the earthy warmth of the floor. You kneel to adjust a tray, noticing subtle differences in worm behavior. Some spin faster, some slower, some pause mid-motion. Every tiny detail is observed, every gesture calculated to maintain the harmony of the workshop. You kneel beside a tray of near-complete cocoons, observing the worms' tiny bodies curling with intricate precision as threads spiral around them. Fringe tidbit: artisans sometimes added tiny powdered herbs to trays to prevent mold or improve silk texture, though the actual effectiveness of this practice is debated. Apprentices move quietly, hands gentle, adjusting leaves and monitoring threads, while the master weaver oversees every motion. The soft clatter of tools, the rustling of leaves, and the faint shifting of trays create a lullaby-like rhythm that draws your attention inward, almost hypnotic in its consistency. A tray of completed cocoons gleams faintly in the lamplight. You marvel at the delicate perfection, realizing that every hour of patient labor, observation, and subtle guidance has culminated in these small, luminous capsules of silk. The workshop slows further, but the steady pulse of movement continues, a gentle heartbeat uniting humans, worms, and the surrounding space. You inhale deeply, attuned to the quiet energy, the soft scents, and the deliberate, meditative rhythm that has governed this space for generations. As night settles, you feel a profound calm. Every thread, tray, and motion tells a story of patience, skill, and quiet devotion. A gentle cadence that relaxes the mind and lulls the senses into a slow, restful rhythm. The night deepens, and the workshop is immersed in a soft, golden shadow, illuminated only by flickering oil lamps that cast gentle, dancing patterns on the walls. You walk slowly along the aisles, feeling the warmth of the lamps and the subtle vibrations of the spinning silkworms beneath your fingers. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian silk workshops often maintained activity into the early night to complete inspections and ensure the final integrity of the cocoons before storage, carefully monitoring humidity and temperature to preserve silk quality. Historians still argue whether Nubian silk workshops maintained strictly controlled climates through trial-and-error methods passed orally or whether early forms of written instructions guided their daily routines. Either way, it's clear that careful observation and meticulous attention were central to success. You adjust a tray slightly, ensuring that none of the worms are crowded and that airflow reaches each tiny creature. The repetition is almost hypnotic. Lift, shift, sprinkle leaves, observe. Outside, the Nile shimmers in the rising sun, birds calling faintly across the water, their voices blending with the soft rustle of silk and the occasional whisper of a coworker. It is a slow, deliberate dance, and you find your own movements slowing to match it. Nearby, A set of rudimentary wooden spindles rests against the wall. You pick one up and feel its worn, smooth surface under your fingers, marveling at how each tool has been shaped by countless hands over decades, perhaps centuries. These are not just tools. They are conduits for skill, memory, and craftsmanship, each one telling a story of patience and quiet persistence. Fringe detail. Some spindles are slightly decorated or engraved, a small mark of pride and identity left by previous workers, a signature in the language of their craft. The colors of the workshop are muted but rich, the deep brown of mud brick walls, the soft cream of the silkworms, the vibrant green of the mulberry leaves. Even the dust suspended in the shafts of sunlight seems to move in slow, languid spirals, creating a dreamlike atmosphere. You feel as though you've stepped into a world slightly outside of time, one where every motion is measured and every detail noticed. As you continue, a faint murmur passes among the workers, the subtle language of glances, nods, and soft words. There is no rush here. Efficiency is married to care. You realize that in this environment, patience is not just a virtue. It is a necessity. Fringe tidbit. Some artisans would hum softly or tell short stories to the worms while working, a practice believed to calm the insects, though its efficacy is debated among scholars. A row of newly spun cocoons catches your attention. Their sheen is faint but unmistakable, delicate and almost ethereal in the soft afternoon light. You feel a sense of wonder at the culmination of small, repetitive acts, hours of feeding, monitoring, and adjusting, distilled into these tiny, perfect structures. The apprentices work alongside the master weaver in coordinated, quiet movements. You follow their rhythm, adjusting leaves, observing silk formation, and monitoring the subtle cues from the environment, temperature, airflow, light intensity. Each motion is deliberate, forming a slow, hypnotic dance that feels both ancient and immediate. As shadows lengthen across the workshop floor, a sense of calm envelopes you. Every small gesture contributes to a collective effort that transcends time. The worms, the leaves, the hands, the spindles, and even the faint sounds of the Nile beyond. You sense the quiet pride in meticulous care, a centuries-old devotion to craft that transforms ordinary leaves and insects into something enduring, delicate, and beautiful. The day's rhythm begins to taper, workers moving slightly slower, their actions measured and intentional. You take a deep breath, absorbing the ambient warmth, the soft hum of activity, and the gentle flicker of sunlight on the trays. In this serene environment, you feel fully immersed, part of a slow, deliberate ecosystem where patience and observation are rewarded with subtle, tangible beauty. Late afternoon settles over the workshop with a softened glow, the sunlight now angling through the shutters and casting long golden lines across the packed earth floor. You move deliberately between the trays, noticing the slight shimmer of silk threads beginning to form as the silkworms weave around themselves with meticulous precision. A young apprentice kneels nearby, adjusting leaves and carefully checking that every silkworm has enough space to finish spinning. Fringe tidbit. Some workshops practiced moonlight inspections, where artisans believed that observing cocoons under soft moonlight would reveal imperfections invisible under artificial light, though historians still debate the practical efficacy of this tradition. You hum a soft tune, mirroring the quiet rhythm of the workshop, feeling the meditative calm settle over you. The master weaver moves fluidly among the trays, her hands precise and deliberate, touching silk threads almost imperceptibly to ensure smooth formation. Fringe detail. In some cases, artisans would rotate trays gently at specific intervals to maintain even spinning, a subtle technique passed down through generations that required patience, precision, and a deep understanding of the silkworm's habits. You follow her motions, your own hands syncing with the workshop's hypnotic cadence. The gentle hum of activity, the faint rustle of leaves, the soft shifting of trays, the occasional clatter of a spindle, forms a soothing background rhythm. Historians still argue about the extent to which Nubian silk techniques influenced neighboring regions. Yet the meticulous attention to each cocoon demonstrates a uniquely refined craft. Outside, the Nile glows softly under the night sky, reflecting the stars and providing a silent companion to the slow, deliberate motions inside. You imagine these threads leaving the workshop, woven into garments or traded along distant routes, each carrying the patient care and cultural knowledge embedded in its creation. The warm scent of mulberry leaves blends with the subtle aroma of silk and lamp oil. You kneel beside a tray of nearly completed cocoons, observing each silkworm's spiraling work. Mistakes are magnified, yet the atmosphere encourages gentle correction rather than abrupt reprimand. You watch a tray being adjusted carefully, leaves repositioned so that each worm can access nourishment without crowding its neighbors. A thought drifts into your mind about the broader impact of this work. Each tray, each cocoon, represents not just labor but the potential for far-reaching trade. Nubian silk, delicate and subtle, will eventually find its way to markets far along the Nile and beyond, interwoven with other cultures' crafts and histories. Historians still debate how much of this silk stayed local versus how much was traded, but you can sense the workshop's importance, both economically and culturally, even as you move slowly through its quiet rows. The rhythm of feeding and adjusting becomes almost meditative. You notice the warmth on your shoulders, the faint smell of damp earth mixed with the sweet scent of mulberry leaves, and the soft, muted buzz of human activity. Even the smallest gestures, the tilt of a wrist, the flick of a leaf, the careful breath near a tray, feel amplified, imbued with purpose. You take a deep breath, letting yourself sink further into the gentle cadence, understanding that this slow, deliberate practice is both craft and meditation. A small silkworm begins to spin a thin thread around itself, a perfect coil, almost imperceptible yet monumental in its significance. You watch it closely, feeling an odd sense of reverence for such a tiny creature accomplishing something so essential, so delicate, and so permanent in its impact. The entire workshop seems to pulse with quiet pride. Every motion, every observation, every careful adjustment contributing to the creation of beauty from such small beginnings. By the time you step back, a light sheen of sweat on your forehead, you feel an odd connection to the generations of hands that have performed these same motions. It is an intimate, almost personal communion with history. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian silk workshops often timed their final adjustments and feedings in the afternoon to coincide with the peak activity of the silkworms, ensuring maximum efficiency and thread quality. A young apprentice kneels beside you, adjusting leaves and removing debris from the cocoon trays. Fringe tidbit: in some workshops, apprentices were instructed to gently sing or hum a rhythm while working, believing the vibrations encouraged smoother spinning, though historians still debate whether this had a practical effect or was mainly a calming ritual. You find yourself unconsciously humming along, feeling strangely connected to the rhythm of the workshop and its tiny inhabitants. The workshop pulses with quiet, hypnotic energy. Wooden spindles, polished from decades of use, rest nearby, their smooth surfaces showing the imprint of countless fingers. Historians still argue whether these tools were primarily functional, ceremonial, or symbolic markers of status and skill, but each spindle clearly carries the accumulated history of hands and hearts dedicated to silk production. A master weaver approaches, inspecting a tray of cocoons with practiced ease. Her fingers brush lightly over the leaves and worms, guiding the silk threads without disturbing them. Fringe detail: some artisans use delicate sticks or thin reeds to guide the silk threads, a technique requiring extreme patience and precision. You attempt to mimic the motion, your fingers trembling slightly, but slowly find a rhythm that matches the quiet pace of the workshop. Outside, the Nile glints under the late sun, its steady current mirrored in the methodical motion of the artisans. You imagine these threads eventually woven into garments or traded far along the river, each strand carrying with it the care, skill, and culture embedded in this quiet, diligent labor. Historians still debate how far Nubian silk traveled beyond Egypt, but even within the workshop, its significance is palpable. Fringe tidbit: artisans sometimes used small whispers or soft rhythms to encourage uniform spinning, a practice more symbolic than scientific, but one that underscores the careful attentiveness of the workshop environment. Apprentices move deliberately, adjusting leaves and monitoring threads, while the master weaver oversees every minute action. The soft, steady rhythm of the workshop creates a meditative atmosphere, each motion both purposeful and calming, lulling you deeper into the experience. A row of fully spun cocoons shimmers faintly in the soft lamplight. You marvel at the delicate perfection, appreciating the hours of observation, gentle adjustments, and quiet labor that created these tiny capsules of silk. Each cocoon reflects not just the work of a silkworm, but the centuries-old traditions of a skilled and patient culture. As the night deepens further, the workshop slows. Hands move more gently, pauses longer, yet the quiet pulse of life remains, a subtle heartbeat connecting humans, worms, and the ambient environment. You feel a profound serenity, every soft sound, subtle movement, and glowing shadow reinforcing a slow, restful cadence. You exhale slowly, taking in the soft glow, gentle motions, and calming rhythm of the workshop. Every thread, tray, and gesture is part of a centuries-old story of patience, care, and devotion, offering a soothing cadence that lulls the senses and prepares the mind for rest. For a few moments, you are not just an observer. You are part of this enduring, unhurried tradition, threading together the past and present in a single, quiet, hypnotic rhythm. By late morning, the workshop has fully awakened into a rhythm that feels almost like breathing. You trudge between low wooden trays, your hands and knees brushing lightly against the packed earth floor, feeling every subtle shift in texture, temperature, and scent. The Nile beyond the open windows glints like liquid gold, birds calling softly as if marking the passage of time in the same slow, deliberate way as the workshop itself. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian silk workshops relied on a combination of careful environmental control and attentive human labor to produce fibers strong enough for weaving into both ceremonial and everyday fabrics. You reach for a worn spindle resting against the wall, its smooth, dark wood shaped by countless hands over decades. Picking it up, you notice faint grooves where fingers pressed repeatedly, a small testament to the quiet dedication of artisans long before you. Fringe tidbit: some spindles were subtly decorated or marked, allowing a master weaver to recognize the work of an apprentice or a particular batch of silk, a primitive signature of pride and identity. You trace the grooves with your fingers, imagining the countless hours of patient spinning embedded in the wood. Workers move around you with a quiet choreography, their motions fluid yet purposeful. Some are adjusting humidity with small fans or carefully moving trays to optimize airflow, while others gently lift leaves or coax worms along, ensuring that no individual is overcrowded or underfed. Historians still argue whether this meticulous attention to environmental detail was codified in written instruction or passed down solely through oral tradition. But either way, the results speak for themselves. Consistently fine silk, delicate and strong, emerging from seemingly simple beginnings. The air carries the soft scent of mulberry leaves mixed with the warmth of the sun-baked earth. You kneel to adjust a tray, noting subtle differences among the worms. Some are spinning faster, some slower, and some pausing mid-motion. Every detail is observed, every gesture calibrated to maintain harmony. Fringe tidbit: artisans sometimes whispered tiny stories or encouragement to the worms, a practice whose efficacy is still debated, but clearly contributed to a ritualized and attentive environment. A row of freshly spun cocoons catches your attention, their translucent silk gleaming faintly in the filtered sunlight. You marvel at the delicate perfection of these tiny creations, realizing that hours of patient observation and labor culminate in these small, almost ethereal forms. The apprentices and master weaver move with synchronized grace, adjusting leaves, observing spinning, and checking airflow. You find your motions aligning with theirs, becoming part of the slow, immersive rhythm that defines the workshop. Every gesture feels deliberate, meditative, and purposeful, a quiet choreography spanning generations. As the sun dips lower, the warm light softens, and a sense of calm pervades the room. Workers move slightly slower, their motions more measured and thoughtful. You pause for a moment, inhaling the gentle scents, listening to the soft sounds of the Nile and rustling leaves, and feeling the serene continuity of centuries of practice, patience, and devotion embedded in every tray and every silkworm. By late afternoon, the workshop feels almost timeless. Every small motion, the careful placement of a leaf, the gentle adjustment of a cocoon, the subtle guidance of a thread, contributes to an enduring craft that bridges generations. You exhale slowly, attuned to the meditative cadence, aware that this quiet labor, though ordinary in appearance, produces beauty, skill, and connection that will ripple far beyond the walls of the workshop. You crouch near a tray, observing how the silkworms inch along the leaves in slow, precise movements. The rhythmic munching, the occasional curl, and the gentle hum of nearby workers create a hypnotic ambience. You notice subtle differences between worms, slightly faster movers, smaller nibblers, paler or creamier hues, each one an individual contributing to a collective outcome. The attention to such minute details is staggering, yet here it is routine, almost meditative. A young apprentice kneels beside you, adjusting leaves in a pattern that maximizes access and prevents crowding. She whispers instructions in soft tones to her cohort, her words weaving through the quiet like part of the workshop's ambient hum. Fringe tidbit. In some Nubian workshops, apprentices would also whisper small stories or myths to the worms, a practice believed to enrich the threads with good fortune or to encourage longevity, though modern scholars debate whether these practices had any measurable effect or were merely cultural rituals. The sunlight now streams in more boldly, illuminating the faint sheen on the worms' pale bodies. You notice a faint dusting of silkworm excrement on the leaves, tiny, almost invisible specks that must be monitored and cleaned, a reminder that even the smallest detail can affect the entire batch. You kneel, carefully removing stray pieces and adjusting leaves, feeling an intimate connection with these creatures and the centuries of knowledge embedded in their care. Nearby, a master weaver inspects the rows of trays, her eyes sharp but gentle. She lifts a few worms to check their condition, then nods approvingly at the apprentice's careful adjustments. You sense a quiet hierarchy here. Respect is earned through precision and attentiveness, not loudness or authority. Mistakes are corrected quietly with guidance and patience, a stark contrast to the chaotic labor you might expect in other ancient industries. As the afternoon wanes into early evening, a golden haze filters through the workshop windows, softening edges and casting long shadows across the low wooden trays. You trudge slowly among the rows of silkworms, noticing how their delicate movements seem almost synchronized with the lengthening shadows. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian silk workshops often adjusted light and airflow in the late afternoon to stabilize environmental conditions, helping silkworms maintain consistent cocoon formation. A young apprentice kneels beside you, carefully separating leaves and ensuring the worms have adequate space. Fringe tidbit. In certain workshops, artisans would sprinkle tiny amounts of water on leaves at this hour, mimicking early morning dew, believed to encourage smoother silk production, though historians still debate whether this practice had measurable effects or was mostly symbolic. You lean in, feeling the fine fuzz of the leaves and the faint warmth of the silk threads forming beneath. The gentle clatter of spindles and the soft rustle of leaves create a calming rhythm that you find yourself following naturally. Historians still argue whether Nubian silk techniques influenced neighboring regions directly or evolved largely independently. Yet the precision and care evident here speak for themselves. A master weaver moves among the trays, checking cocoon formation with practiced, fluid gestures. Her hands lift leaves gently, guiding silk threads with near-invisible motions. Fringe detail. In some workshops, artisans even whispered short rhymes or chants, believed to coax the silkworms into spinning evenly, a curious blend of superstition and routine that adds a soft, almost mystical ambience to the room. You mimic her movements, feeling your own hands merge with the slow rhythm of the workshop. You glance toward the wall where early spools of silk are stacked neatly. Each coil gleams faintly in the sunlight, evidence of hours of careful spinning and attention. These threads, delicate yet strong, will eventually be woven into cloth for nobles, temples, and trade, traveling far beyond the Nile. Historians still argue whether Nubian silk ever reached distant empires in measurable quantities or primarily served local markets. But standing here, you feel the weight of its cultural significance regardless of scale. The workshop hums gently, a symphony of subtle motion. You watch a tray being adjusted, Leaves shifted just so, worms guided along. The harmony is almost hypnotic, your own breathing slowing as you sync with it. The combination of soft light, rhythmic movements, and quiet diligence wraps around you like a gentle cloak, easing your mind into a state that feels both meditative and immersive. As you rise to your feet, stretching slightly, you realize that time has slipped by unnoticed. The workshop is alive, yet calming, each motion purposeful but unhurried. You are part of this quiet ecosystem now, connected to every hand, every worm, and every leaf that has been arranged, observed, and tended for generations. The artistry, patience, and devotion are palpable, and you feel a sense of reverence for this world where the ordinary, feeding worms, shifting leaves, tending trays, is transformed into an enduring craft that shapes history quietly, one delicate thread at a time. As the sun climbs higher, a soft warmth fills the workshop, mingling with the earthy scent of mulberry leaves and the faint sweetness of nascent silk threads. You trudge carefully along the narrow aisles, noticing how the workers have adapted the space to maximize both light and airflow. Wooden shutters are angled to allow a gentle breeze to drift through, carrying the subtle sounds of the Nile and the distant cries of birds. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian silk workshops often relied on environmental cues from the Nile and surrounding landscape, using natural light and wind patterns to regulate temperature and humidity. A trader arrives quietly, balancing a small basket of exotic pigments and tools used to embellish finished silk. Fringe tidbit: some merchants traveled from surprisingly distant regions, carrying pigments derived from minerals or plants that were believed to improve the sheen of the silk. Others carried tiny charms said to protect the fabric from bad luck during transport. You watch as the workers exchange polite bows and measured words, a practiced ritual that blends commerce with quiet ceremony. The hum of the workshop persists, unbroken. Apprentices kneel beside trays, their hands moving in precise, repeated gestures, lifting leaves, adjusting worms, checking for stray debris. You join in, feeling your own rhythm syncing with theirs. Historians still argue whether Nubian silk trade networks were primarily local or if they extended into Egypt and beyond, but the careful negotiation and preparation you witness suggests a sophistication in both commerce and craft.